Okay, so want to welcome everybody to tonight's session of the virtual Missouri Livestock Symposium. This will actually be our wrap-up event for this year as we begin planning, hopefully, for an in-person 2021 Missouri Livestock Symposium. So if you are accustomed to joining us in person in Kirksville on the first Friday and Saturday in December, please mark that on your calendar as hopefully we get back to some sort of normalcy in this crazy world, and you know, we can go back to having our usual event. So tonight, well, actually, I'll do one more item. If you have missed any of our previous sessions, please go to MissouriLivestock.com. To view those, and in a day or two, or at least by Monday, we'll have posted the recording of this event that you can share or watch again. So again, welcome everybody for coming this evening. Got a couple great guests with us this evening. Mr. Mark Russell. Mark is the Executive Director for the Missouri Beef Industry Council, where he works with his elected producer board in program and budget planning, producer communications, industry relations, and research for advancing the efforts of the Missouri Beef Checkoff. Mr. Mike John is also with us this evening. Mike is a cattleman, first and foremost. Mike, I always like to say that. You're a cattleman from Huntsville, Missouri. Mike is also a past president of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, in which he served that role. I believe it was in 2006, Mike. Mike is currently the director of the health track operations for MFA Incorporated. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. I'm a big believer that if you're going to have a good discussion about topics at hand, you always go to the top of the chain. And certainly, I think I found two individuals tonight that can speak about all the questions that have been submitted and answer any questions that we might have coming in. So for those of you that are on with us tonight, we thank you for joining us. As we go forth in our discussion tonight, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Mark or Mike, and guys, I will try to keep you separate. I know that's very close, and I'll try my best to keep you separate. But if you've got any questions you would like to ask our group tonight, please put those in the chat box. We are going to monitor that. And like I said, there were several questions that got asked ahead of time. And so as we go through those, if you have additional questions, I'll certainly be watching that and try to ask that to our experts this evening. So again, gentlemen, glad you're with us this evening, and look forward to the discussion as we go ahead. And so Mark, I'm gonna throw the first question to you. And so one of the first questions submitted was, it's basically what are you doing in the checkoff right now in Missouri? And what are kind of your headlining items? What are the promotion things that you're trying to push right now? And what would you like the viewers tonight to know about the checkoff in Missouri?
Well, Zach, first, thank you. Can you hear me all right?
I can. We can.
All right. Good deal. Good deal. Well, it's a pleasure to get on this format tonight to visit with producers and ranchers and people interested in our industry. The checkoff, you know, it started in the late 80s, and it still remains true today to what it was started for, and that was to drive demand for beef to consumers, not only in Missouri, but the United States and the world. Missouri is, you know, it's a leading state in cow-calf production. We don't have a lot of feedlots, but we do have lots of cows and lots of grass. And that creates, you know, between 40 and 50,000 beef producers who, you know, they're a part of the checkoff. I say I work for all 40 to 50,000 beef producers, and we focus, you know, in many different ways, but our primarily three legs of the stool, which we have always done, is promotion, education, and research. And we can break education into consumer education outreach and producer, more producer and investor type communication. Promotion and consumer education is where it's at in our ability to create beef demand to consumers. And if we'd have known 3 or 4 years ago what we know today and what we've been facing in the challenges, I don't know if we'd have changed anything, but what I've seen in the last year is maybe consumers really starting to see the value of what beef is to the diet. Even during a time when we lost the ability to get meat through the processing, through the harvesting, through the distribution, because of extrinsic factors, people were gobbling up beef, and we actually had higher consumption in beef in the last 6 months to a year than we did the year before. Beef demand is strong right now, and if nothing more is an indication, is to see that consumers, whether they're local or rural or urban, they're looking for places to buy meat. And we've got meat processors and new meat processors all over the state now that are backed up, some into next year already, trying to meet the demand that people are wanting to process beef. We focus a lot in our promotional areas on digital and social mediums. You know, we have a young demographic that we want to eat beef the rest of their life. Most of us, Mike, John, and I's age, you know, we're kind of set in our dietary habits, but we're really looking at that Gen Z and millennial and primarily female that makes a lot of the buying decisions. And we reach them through promotion differently than how we reached our target market in the late 80s and early 90s. Social media, digital platforms, it's exactly where we can reach those people. And we, last year, even in Missouri, we reached over 1.3 million people through the Checkoff efforts to get information out. We work continually with what we call influencer groups in our state that include dietitians and retail grocers and chefs and physicians and nurse practitioners. It's vitally important that we make sure that they know the current research, the current information, and the truth and facts about beef, because they're on the front lines to our consumers. And when we have, you know, just a few people that try to get out and drive demand for beef and represent the beef industry in our state, we need those kind of influencers to help us do the job. So we depend on a lot of influencers in our state. So it's an important part in Missouri. It's an exciting part. It seems like every day is different, and especially in the last year, everything's been different. And we rolled from going from a lot of restaurant type promotions to, you know, the most sought after recipe in the last 6 months has been, you know, meatloaf. And how many times would people have said meatloaf is really the go-to recipe? But when people started cooking at home and they couldn't eat out, those comfort foods became very, very important. So we've done a lot of things in the last year different than we've done in the previous years. But what we're seeing right now is a strong, strong demand, not only in Missouri, but also nationally.
That's a good point, and so I'll follow up. You kind of let the door open there, Mark, about the demand factor. And so, Mike, I'm gonna flip it to you. And I know you've probably heard this question 1,000 times, and that's okay, because you know, even if you answer it 1,000 times, somebody new might still hear it. And so, as we see, Mike, today, boxed beef prices are really at all-time highs, or near all-time highs. Demand is, as Mark alluded to, has been very good. You know, as a driving factor of the Checkoff, I would say if that is their measure of success, they are doing very well. But you know, we see the on-farm prices, and so I would say that. And you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, and I would say the beef Checkoff probably has unfairly over the years, taken blame for a lot of the things that they really had nothing to do with. But when you look at on the farm price levels, farmers over the last 3 or 4 years haven't really shared in that success a lot. Maybe not. I don't know. You know, so I'll throw the question to you. Is it time, and again, these aren't my questions, these were submitted questions. So is it time we rethink you know, how the beef checkoff is and who the major benefactor here is when producers have been struggling over the last 3 or 4 years?
Well, that's a loaded question, and there are all kinds of pathways that you can go down to attempt to answer that process. And you know, when you add all of the craziness of COVID and plant fires and supply chain slowdowns and all those kind of things, I mean, they throw wrenches into the free market system that aren't normal. But I can remember, I mean, and I've told this story a zillion times, and I remember my granddad told me a couple of things that I will never forget, and I think they were part of our problem, not our solution. He said, Mike, to be successful in the cattle business, you just need to work hard and keep your mouth shut. And the other thing that he told me was that the only money he ever made in the cattle business was the appreciation on the value of his land. And what causes that? I mean, to me, when we had these discussions in the late 80s and the 90s on the mergers and some of those kind of things, we had those problems. They were still there. And how am I, as a cow-calf producer, how am I going to go and change that dynamic? How am I going to go get people to eat more beef? How am I going to go tell people that we're trying to get away from those 18-inch tough ribeyes and we're trying to give you what you want? You know, how can I do that by myself? And I think we all know the answer to that question. That's not going to happen. We're also an amazingly ancient, I mean, as far as most modern businesses today, we are ancient and traditional and driven by many of those factors that are still ancient and traditional. So I'm not sure that I'm clear in my head yet how you discuss, and I'm certainly no economist, and I'm certainly no meat marketer or exporter or any of those kind of things where people have either benefited or have been damaged by this process. But I literally cannot see how you can change a free market system in any way and have it reflect the trends or the values that we need. Mark mentioned that these next couple of generations are more interested in how that beef was presented and how those animals were handled and all those kind of things. And yet we've done almost nothing to increase the transparency in that. But I also am not a fan at all of government intervention. So I'm not answering your question directly because I don't know the answer to your question directly. But I also think you got to be careful what you ask for. And if you start messing with the free enterprise system and the government gets involved, then then they pick the winners and losers instead of the market. So I'm not sure that where more transparency, how it needs to be structured. I'm not sure why the meat business has really never been tethered to the live animal market. Those two markets seemingly have never been connected in any sensible or meaningful way to where you can, or a cow-calf producer could take a risk management position based on box beef price instead of fed cattle price. I know that there's probably some smarter people out there in the world that can figure out how to do that. But I just am going to throw caution out here a little bit and saying that before you get too wild about a legislative or a regulatory solution to the supply interruptions that happened this year that can have a long lasting effect and take what I have always viewed as one of the cornerstones of the beef business as being you are free to do what you want to do. So I don't want to give up very much of that freedom. The demand portion of that, I mean, getting back to the checkoff portion of that, I got off base when I made that comment about my granddad. The only way we could solve those two issues that he told me was to not work hard and keep our mouth shut, and to not let appreciation on the land be the only value we have in being a cattleman. So we had to increase demand somehow. And if you look back at the early 80s and and some of the things that happened, the economic signals were just making bigger. Nobody cared about how tough they were. Nobody cared about how much marbling they had. I mean, we just made them bigger, and we were throwing an unbelievable supply of less than desirable beef products on the market, and nobody was paying attention to that. We've come a long way since then. And I know people that through this time period where a lot of producers were losing terrible amounts of money, that were still making $80, $90, $100 a head, because they were linked in somehow to that market signal where they could get paid for their genetic value, and it was superior. So you don't want to damage the innovators, but you do want to make the market as transparent as possible. So I'm not opposed to some of the solutions that have been presented. I just am urging caution.
So just a little follow up to that, Mike. I mean, is it a broken market? I mean, we all want free market enterprise. We all want supply and demand factors to determine price at the end of the day. It doesn't seem like we're there from a producer perspective, that supply and demand, as we've seen, demand is at all-time highs, is really trickling down, if you will, to the producer level. So probably the best quote I've ever heard, and we've had other sessions on this particular topic, I see what the problem is, I don't know the solution. Is that a fair statement?
Sure. I mean, I think that's absolutely. I'm no economist. I'm no market expert by any means. I mean, I can show you times that I've lost money on the futures market that would curl your hair. I mean, it's not a perfect system by any means. But if you start guaranteeing things like that, then you will kill innovation, and you will kill change, and you won't meet consumer expectations. I mean, you cannot have both options. So yeah, I'm sure that there are things we can do. And like I said, I'm not opposed to some of the potential legislation that's been written that asks for transparency, a little more transparency, and to understand what the price differences are. But I've also over the years gotten a little tired of some producers that say, well, what do I care what the beef market is? I sell cattle, not beef. And that, to me, that is a head in the sand, a ridiculous attitude that if you're not aware of your final market and what your final market's looking for, then I don't see how you'll ever be successful.
So, Mark, I'll come back to you to another question that has, if you will, I mean, anybody that follows social media, when you look at, say, the Bill Gates interview, and the statement that every basically First Nation should eat synthetic meats. That's a big platform. I mean, that's a big time thing. When you actually dig down into the science, and in my role in Extension, we're very science-based. So when you actually look at the science of that sort of a statement, the science doesn't follow through with what the statement is. So what do you believe the Checkoff's role is in say dispelling disinformation about the environmental impact that beef has, and what can we do moving forward to try to build a big enough platform that we can reach as many people as, say, the Bill Gates thing did?
Good thoughts and questions, Zach. It was interesting the day Bill Gates made his statement, I guess, about as I would say, fake meat or cultured meat. It was on the tips of quite a few radio talk shows the next day. I actually was able to get on a station and rebut a little bit of what he was saying on talk radio. The research data, the Checkoff has spent a lot of money in putting together sustainability information about the importance of beef, utilizing and really being probably one of the cures for our environmental problems instead of one of the problems for our environmental problems. We, through many different messaging ways, I think it's going to become one of the key components in some of the strategies that we go to consumers with. If you ask a millennial today what's important to you, and they want to know that that the food was produced humanely, environmentally friendly, and sustainably, and it's a buzzword, and it seems to be growing in information. And I think the people that are questioning beef's role in the planet, it's like you want to say, just look at the science, look at what cattle can do in converting plant material that nobody can digest into something that is edible and is healthy and is good for you. We in our industry, we kind of make fun of cow burps and things like that, and we roll our eyes when they say, well, that's the problem we have. But I think we have to give credence to those people that are doing that. We have to be steadfast in what we do. But I've seen numerous sustainability types of information. Some of it's probably a little bit, as I would say, there's too much down in the weeds, but we just need to have a simple story that goes to consumers. They understand that cattle are not the problem in our environment. And when we start talking about carbon sequestration and we talk about methane problems and carbon dioxide problems, when it gets down to it, you just have to start showing what other things in our world today probably we need to focus on more than we do on livestock.
So Mark, I'll come right back to you, and then I'm going to let Mike weigh in on it a little bit, but I'll come right back to you. And one of the things that is brought up quite frequently about the checkoff dollars, whether it be Missouri or other state organizations or nationally, is the ability that we can't really disparage between competing proteins, right? So, I mean, we can't go out and talk about how bad, swine producers are, because that might hurt the pork market. And I think everybody understands that. This fake meat thing, the synthetic meats, is entirely something different. And so when you look at their platform is basically, we're so much better than the beef cow is for the environment. So, I mean, they're lobbing grenades, if you will. How does the beef checkoff handle that in the long run? I mean, are we still fighting with our hands tied there? I mean, I understand that's a protein, but I mean, their whole platform is based off of how bad beef is for the environment. So how do you go about combating that?
Well, Zach, I think really the way to answer what I would say is some talking points is with truth and facts. It's interesting, as I've traveled around many times, we would bring the plant-based burgers to a cattlemen's meeting, and we would talk about them. And to me, I want to talk about the differences and the similarities. And probably 20 years ago, we had plant-based burgers 20 years ago, and we had what we called bean burgers or soy burgers in school. But they weren't competing for the market share that we love, and we don't want to give up any of it. And even today, it's still less than 1% of the burger market, but they do have a huge visibility, and they keep growing. So whether it's cultured or whether it's plant-based, I think it's something that we have to be aware of. We have to talk about the differences. And in the plant-based world, it's sodium, it's highly processed ingredients that it takes 20 to 30 to make it taste something similar to a beef burger. But I can tell you there is still huge differences if you taste it on its own. But if you put it on a burger and you cover it up with lots of condiments, I've had farmers and ranchers that can't tell the difference. So from a taste standpoint, we have our work cut out for us, right? But I think the differences are in how it's made, how it's processed, and we still can't change. You know, one of the things, and I even said it on the radio talk show, we cannot convert millions of acres of grassland into something that'll grow peas or legumes or something that can make a plant-based burger. We have to grow grass. We have to convert that into an animal that can convert it into meat protein. And there's not a way that we can economically or environmentally produce enough cultured meat, fake meat, plant-based proteins to sustain the demand that we have. It, you know, at 0.5% of the market share right now, and they're spending millions and millions and millions of dollars to launch products in. And, you know, we keep seeing them in, I guess, you know, announcing new chains of stores and convenient, you know, of fast food restaurants that are adding it. But what we are also saying is that it is not taking huge market shares away. In fact, the first 6 months of the Impossible Whopper with Burger King, ground beef sales increased faster in Burger King than they had over the previous 6 months. We think a lot of that was curiosity, but they're still coming back to that burger for the reasons, because it's real beef.
Mike, I'm going to kind of go to you, and I received a few questions towards the synthetic or fake meat sort of a platform, and so you know, one of the things that I say probably really digs at producers, when you look at the big four, if you will, they're becoming heavily invested in this synthetic meat market, whether it's the vegetable or the cell cultured or what it is, but and I have to appreciate your response that cattlemen aren't in the beef business, because absolutely we are. Okay, I absolutely understand that, and it's a partnership with the packer, right? And I think most people understand that, but then as the producer, they look at that and they say, the guy that we're partners with is now investing heavily in a synthetic meat that is doing nothing but disparaging us. And, we're using Checkoff dollars to help them sell their product and our product. So, what needs to change there? Or I mean, do you see a problem with that? Is it a valid argument from a producer standpoint?
I think so. I don't appreciate it at all, to be honest. The only answer I've heard that made any kind of sense whatsoever was that, well, that meat could be used in markets around the world and places around the world where they can't afford the real thing. But I get really ticked off. I mean, it just astounds me. I mean, and everybody knows that the press does what they want to do these days. They don't have to report the truth. But we hear all this hype about antibiotics and non-hormone and organic and all of these other claims that are out there. And we've got a vast, it seems like anyway, there's a vast following for those claims, and yet they're willing to eat the ingredient label that's on that veggie burger, I mean, you got to be kidding me. I mean, I'm just shocked that that you can make the argument on one side and not carry it all the way through. But your question on the packer side, yes, I don't understand their investment in that. And again, the only answer that I've heard from anybody in that industry was that, well, this is, we don't see this as a mainstream product here, but it's something that we can sell in Africa or somewhere where they typically can't afford our product.
So just as a follow-up to that, Mike, a little bit, and again, and I kind of threw that at Mark that, beef checkoff nationally or state-wise, can't disparage between proteins. Do we need to try to look at that differently? Does something need to change? Because, I mean, it as one person put it in a question, it feels like we're fighting a battle that we have no weapons, that we're giving them the bullets and then they're shooting it at us. It seems like the packer is benefiting greatly from investment in checkoff dollars by producers, and then they turn around and invest in synthetic meat. So what has to change to be more producer friendly, so that they can get more of that retail dollar?
Well, the first part of your question about the disparaging the other protein products, I mean, quite frankly, from an economic standpoint, all the protein tends to get lumped together, and those relationships between the price of beef and the price of pork and the price of chicken tend to flow together. And the argument that I've always seen presented that had some economic analysis behind it was that if the price of chicken goes up, the price of beef is going to go up. And if the price of pork goes up, the price of beef and chicken is going to go up. I mean, that they tend to, when the water gets higher, all the boats float better. So those relationships are important economic factors. I love that you asked this question, and I appreciate the possibilities here and the thought processes here, and I appreciate the antagonism that is involved in that process. But I got to be honest with you, the only answer that I can see that has the possibility for producers to get more involved and take a bigger piece of that pie is to stay involved in their product farther down the chain. I mean, I see it happen every day, and I see producers that are tired of taking average prices. I've had some of the most respected, not even large feed yard producers, but feed yard managers that say, I really get tired of paying too much for the cruddy cattle, and I never have to pay enough for the good ones. And as cow-calf producers, the only way to leverage that difference is to leverage that difference. And traditionally, we have never done that. We've always just, as an industry, especially in the where 75% of the cows are, we're just price takers. And we take somebody asked me one time, probably 15 years ago, what is the prime, would you say are the top 5 reasons that people pick a particular time to sell their animals? And the top 5 reasons were never profitability. They were the farm payment was due, mama wants a new car, the kids are home from college, I got some help, I finally got the little boogers caught. I mean, it's such a for a huge number of the cows in this country, it is not profit driven. And for the guys that I see that are being extremely successful, then they are staying involved in the management and handling of their product way farther down the line. And and I'm not suggesting that retained ownership's for everybody, or that there's a process that'll work better. I'm kind of a fan of some of these regional packing plants. If you look at, you talked about the price disparagement between the box beef and live cattle prices. Talk to anybody that has been able to get some appointments at some of these local locker plants and see how much money they've been losing. Trust me, it is not a negative number. So there are ways to change that paradigm, and I realize that our industry isn't very comfortable doing that. It really is not very comfortable doing that. And I remember the study that was done that caused a tremendous amount of angst and lawsuits. And I hate to even bring this up now because I'll probably get bombarded on Facebook, but that beef quality audit that basically showed that compared to our top competitors, which were pork and poultry, that we spend 218 or 209, this was 10, 15 years ago, that we spend over $200 a head more in transaction and in between and movement and costs that those industries don't have. They literally, now you can argue that integration is not a good thing for producers, and I'm with you on that. I'm not arguing that at all. I'm just saying that there are people out there who understand that there is a difference in how you manage a genetically unknown genetic product. And yet you got to be honest. I mean, I know I'll take shots here, but we got producers out here that still buy broken mouth cows and never tag a cow, never tag a calf. Take a uncut bull from the neighbor and turn it out with them and calve year round. And, you know, historically, those guys have made more money than the people that really tried hard because everything's sold on the average. Now, you can't tell me that that is the way to advance this industry and to get more consumers to utilize our product. And you know, I want to defend the Checkoff. I will never forget, I was an NCBA officer when the BSE cow was in. And beef demand up to that point was in this country, the first quarter of 2004. And the reason for that, the only reason for that, was that the very, very talented people, that many of them came from the National Livestock and Beef Board onto the Federation side of NCBA as contractors. They had all those relationships set up with the press, with newspapers, with dietary doctors. They had everybody lined up and ready. So that when that happened, they had a very strategic plan that went out and saved our beef market, because we couldn't export anymore. And that was a huge example of what you can do when the industry works together and uses common dollars to promote our product.
That's a very good example. And so Mike brought up the point, and I'll kind of dive a little deeper into that. But Mark, I'm going to throw the question at you. Mike brought up regional packing plants, if you will. He also brought up local slaughter. This state has invested a huge amount of money in trying to grow and develop that part of the beef business. And you know, I try not to take a personal note here, but I absolutely applaud them for that. And so, and just so that everybody is on, and I do see the chat question about what MBIC has done to promote beef that the national Checkoff has not. And so I'm going to spin that a little different direction here and hopefully answer both questions at one time. What can MBIC do to help, or what are they doing maybe to help promote that within the boundaries of the state of Missouri? Because as I've said, the Department of Ag, the governor, we've seen a lot of investment in what I would consider Missouri beef. And that goes to Mike's question of, or statement, if you will, of following it more to the end point. So how can MBIC help producers, or what have they done? What maybe are they planning to help producers go through that last leg of promoting their product within the confines of the state of Missouri, and hopefully getting them a bigger share of that retail dollar?
Well, Zach, it's, you know, we'd have never dreamed that it would take you know, in some of these small plants, we'd be backed up a year or more right now. But I've had a lot of calls in the last 3 or 4 months of people wanting to know, what can we do to help individual producers or groups of producers in trying to capture that value? And maybe it's selling direct with cows, maybe it's selling finished animals. And I think we've seen a resurgence of interest in that. And through the Checkoff, you know, we support it. It doesn't matter whether it's a plant killing 5 animals a week or whether it's a plant killing 500 animals a day. We can support them and help them in driving demand to consumers through our education programs, through working and linking up potential markets with them. We've been able to do that, I think, you know, and it's still in the early stages of the Missouri Prime Plan in Pleasant Hope, but we're seeing just tremendous opportunities for us to, I think, support these smaller plants and give them the type of marketing and aid that we can provide them without doing brand endorsement. One of the challenges we have, of course, in the beef industry is that We're not going to go out there and endorse one brand over another. We're prohibited from doing that because we're in the business of promoting beef. Doesn't matter whether it's hormone free or antibiotic free or, you know, and I always say, you know, when people say it's antibiotic free, and I'd say, well, you know, do you think that there's antibiotics in the meat at Walmart? And they look at me and they say, well, and I said, there's not. And I said, that's because we have a great federal USDA inspection service that protects our consumers from having antibiotics that show up in the meat supply. So we're doing all we can, I think, through the Checkoff I guess I would say, support those local processors to help educate these guys that want to maybe feed out 15 or 20 head and direct market them. We've got lots of people that we supply a lot of, is what I would say, support materials, marketing materials, things that they can give to their customers. And I bet I'm getting 2 or 3 calls a week on what can you send me to help me in marketing my products.
Well, I'm glad we have an organization that can absolutely be their resource to help them with those questions. And so, Mike, I'm going to come right back to you. And one of the questions that got asked, and I know, and again, this is one of those things I know you've been asked a lot. NCBA is one of the largest contractors of beef checkoff dollars, and the question is kind of targeted towards, you know, what do they do with those dollars as a contractor? Is that a separate arm from the legislative side of NCBA? How do they keep those separately? And then, as you know, we'll follow up with maybe some more pointed questions after that.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say that it's always been handled perfectly. And I remember being in 2006, I remember being in a real quandary there's a huge fight going on between the staffs of the beef board and the Federation and NCBA. And what the fight was over, and I mean, literally, if you go back to the formation of this, the people the most talented people, the only people in the country who had really been doing a good job of promoting U.S. meat products, you know, just generically, not for a given company or a given brand, was the National Livestock and Beef Board. And those people are still, or at that time, were still basically all employed by the Federation Division of NCBA. And there is a firewall in place, and it's very, very carefully monitored. You get audited by USDA, and like I say, we haven't always been perfect. There have been times when money was misallocated and had to be refunded, but the main thing that got me was that one of the biggest fights I ever saw was the fact that acknowledgement wasn't happening correctly. And what I mean by that, if an article was written by Bo Reagan, for example, or somebody that had been at the National Livestock and Meat Board, very talented people that knew more about promoting our product than anybody. Typically, over time, they would sign it, you know, with their name, and that they worked for the Federation Division of NCBA. Well, according to the Beef Board, they needed to say on behalf of America's cattle producers. Now, I don't object to either one of those. To me, it doesn't really matter. But you know, I've managed enough employees to know that you have to find a way to give people a reward, and their paycheck should be their reward. I mean, but if you really want to keep loyal employees and keep them working for the brand, you know, they have to feel like they belong, and they have to feel some. So anyway, I was basically in the middle of that conflict, and it ended up costing a lot of money and some real tension between the beef board officers and NCBA's officers. But I can assure you that there is a Herculean effort made to make sure that nobody crosses that firewall. But the reason that NCBA has over time has been the primary contractor for checkoff dollars is because of that talented staff that has so much experience in managing those projects that meet the requirements of the Act and Order. And you know, I think some people tend to forget sometimes that the operating committee decides on which projects are going to get funded, and with their half of the dollar. Some people tend to forget sometimes that a lot of money will even come from some of these states that have a huge cattle population and a small human population. And they'll pool that money with the beef board and fund projects in New York City or San Francisco or places where there's way more people than there are cattle. So the system, like I said, the system's not perfect. There are a lot of growing pains when you have volunteer leaders that don't understand the complication of that. Sometimes things get stepped on or out of whack, and anybody that says there's never been something done wrong is wrong. I mean, they're just flat wrong. Things sometimes don't happen correctly. But I've never been around people that were more dedicated and more intelligent and more trained to do the things that they do than the staff at the Federation, on the Federation side of NCBA.
I certainly appreciate your comments and the distinction between the sides and the firewall. And so I'll follow up with another question that got submitted, maybe a little more poignant to that. And so it's hard for the average producer. It's even hard for some of those that have that intimate knowledge that there is a lot of separation there. But it's very hard to convince producers that there is this firewall. And so when you start talking, and we talked a little bit about the legislative changes and there are varying opinions across the country, the legislative changes targeted towards cattle markets. It seems NCBA has been, and I'm not going to say right or wrong, but NCBA has been very, I don't know that withdrawn is, but very cautious about supporting any legislative changes. But I think producers are very frustrated with the fact that as the largest contractor of Checkoff dollars, their grassroots efforts have gone somewhat unheard. Does that make sense? And so, what's the message to those producers that feel like they're not being heard? Really, when you look at a lot of your state cattlemen's organizations, it's some might even say it's a little bit fractured. They're not always on the same page right now moving forward as to what to do with cattle markets. And I'm not trying to get into a cattle marketing discussion, more how do you approach those producers that feel like they're funding the opposition, if you will, as it was kind of put to me earlier?
Well, boy, I had to debate RCAF up in South Dakota a few times, and that most of those statements never end with a question. So I appreciate that it's a question. It became very apparent to me that most of the people that were speaking the loudest against the process and against our organization did never attend the meeting. And I have a bias against things like ballot initiatives. And the example that I always give in that is that, okay, we go through a process and we elect representatives, and those representatives are appointed to committees. Those committees meet for hours and hours and hours and see all the facts and all the economics, and they get to weigh their decisions. Now, many times they just blow those off and just do it politically. I get that. But at least they make an effort to go, before they propose some legislation, they at least make an effort to go through all of that process and understand all the ins and outs and the economic ramifications and those kind of things. And yet a ballot initiative, just if it gets enough petition signatures, it shows up on a ballot and everybody that goes to the polls just votes on it. And I used to argue relentlessly that if you want to be a part of the process, then you need to show up and you need to let your voice be heard. I mean, it is pathetic, frankly, that there is this kind of dissension in amongst members of the beef industry when so few of them belong to anything. I don't know what some of the other organizations' numbers are, but you look at Missouri's Cattlemen's Association or any, there aren't any of them that have hardly any saturation. If there's 50,000 beef producers in the state of Missouri, there's about a 10%, 10 or 11 or 12% of those members those people actually become members and get involved in the process. So if you don't get involved in the process, I don't see how you have a way to say anything, frankly. I will give one example that I have always, has always amazed me. Bill Donald was an NCBA president from Montana. I don't know the year, but it was, anyway, it was around the time that I was very active. And Bill was always, being from Montana, was always kind of on the fringe of, and always arguing against NCBA policy, but he always showed up. And the main thing that they wanted every member to have a vote. And the only way they could figure out to do that, and it's really appropriate now after we've had mail-in ballots, the only way we could figure out how to do that was to put a ballot on these policy issues in the magazine. And you know, you can't imagine how many people were against it. We probably can. I mean, there was all kinds of people against it. It went beyond the normal policy process. It didn't go through committees, blah, 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 blah. And so, but at the end of the day, he stuck with it. I don't know how many years he stuck with it and made it happen. And it did happen, and we got that policy and instituted. And here's my example. The number of people that actually returned those ballots is infant. I mean, it's literally not even measurable with a percent. So it just goes to show you that if you, I use that example, that if you participate in the process, then you have a say in the process. And if you don't participate in the process and you just want to stand outside and throw stones, I guess that's your business. But I don't have much respect for that.
So Mark, I'll kind of throw it to you a little bit on that question. I would assume you find it very hard a lot of times being caught in the middle of legislative policies when you're not, you know, your mission is not legislative in nature, but you know, just so that everybody knows, and you know, as I've heard you say many times, 50 cents of every dollar goes to the National Checkoff Fund. And so, you know, what would you want to say to those producers that feel like they're funding something that does not speak to them? And how do you handle, if you will, being caught in the middle of that, where you know, your mission is not legislative, it's you know, it's educational, it's research based, it's demand driven, but they all kind of get entwined in the end, don't they?
Well, they do. And, you know, when we talk about 50 cents stays in the state of Missouri and 50 cents goes to national, there are so many things that they do that complement what we do in our state. You know, we do more probably in youth education and in our schools now with the Mo Beef, Mo Kids program, with over 25,000 kids benefiting with more beef in our state now today. But the national organization, they focus more on, you know, national type programs. And then that money then in turn goes into some of the USMEF work and the foreign marketing. You know, what they do and what we do complement each other. And we do, by the federal act and order, we cannot get involved in policy type issues that many times we would like to. But you know, in our state, the Missouri Cattlemen's Association does a fantastic job of staying on top of policy. They stay on top of issues in Jefferson City and nationally. Every week you see things that are going on that they have worked tirelessly at with local farmers coming into the Capitol, their officers. They work with these U.S. House and senators in D.C. and getting legislation going. So, you know, I think that there's opportunities for both, and you know, we appreciate what the affiliates and the policy organizations do, and then we work real hard to keep that demand up. So there is, to me, I always say if demand drops, then we don't need as many cattle out in the country. And if there's not as many cattle out in the country, then there's not as much of a need for an affiliate organization. So we kind of go hand in hand. And if it's a policy issue, we try to let that be a policy issue, and we try to focus on I jokingly say, when it's a cattle issue, it's a cattleman's issue, and when it's edible, it becomes my job to help get people to eat it and make sure that we've got consumers that want it.
Just a little bit of a follow-up to that, Mark. We've talked about a lot of these sorts of issues, the synthetic meats, the environmental footprint. Do you know of any current efforts nationally or within the state, or are we funding studies to look harder at the environmental footprint of cattle, or the nutritional, if you will, maybe non-nutritional aspects of synthetic meats? As an organization nationally or a state organization, are we putting our dollars as cattle producers towards those research effects that, say, your legislative arms can take that information and help in their efforts? I mean, is that kind of what you're talking about, your hand in hand?
Yes, that's part of what I'm talking about, hand in hand, Zach. Sustainability has, it's the environment, it's the ethics, it's the economics. But when we really talk about the environment, there are a lot of dollars going into national research right now that's going to be able to give those policy people the information that they need when they start going out and working on these policy and environmental issues on a state and national level. But the EPA is probably going to look at things a lot different than what they have in the last 4 to 5 years. And I think the emphasis that the NCBA has got, and where we have put money from National Checkoff into sustainability, so it can, one, address consumer interest, and it can help us drive demand for beef on the consumer side. It in turn will help our policy, and it will help our producer group as well, and being able to move that message onto what I would say is the governmental role.
Very good. So this was one question that came through that I thought was quite interesting. As we look to what Beef Checkoff spends money in, and I kind of, and maybe I'm inferring a little bit here, but I kind of understand where this question has come from. And so the question is kind of pointed towards, if you look at cable television shows nowadays, or let's just say mostly cable television shows these days, there's a lot of shows that, if you will, point out to they're very cowboy focused in nature, beef cattle focused. The number one drama network is about a ranching family, and I'm not here to give an infomercial about that, but the question is kind of pointed towards, are we trying to join partnerships with those? It's not often, if you will, Hollywood or people with big platforms tend to follow the same message as say, ranchers, cowboys, cattlemen, producers, and we don't always tend to walk the same path, a la the Bill Gates interview. So, are we looking at joining hands with some of those people? Because that's honestly, that is a huge national audience there, that's captivated with, something that is very ranching, cattle producer oriented. So any comments to that particular question?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. We always fall back into our medias and our broadcast folks. In the last 2 to 3 years, a lot of Checkoff dollars went to really a show that millions of people follow on America's Greatest Ninja Warrior, whatever, where these athletes go across these really demanding, what I would say, courses and stuff. And we had a guy named Lance Pecos, and he was the beef spokesperson, and he actually worked tirelessly not only to promote beef through that network syndicated show, but also through many appearances throughout the country. And I would say we're always looking for opportunities, whether it's a ranching show or whether it's another venue. And most recently, it's a first ever that the Beef Checkoff is now a NASCAR promoter. And we had the Beef It's What's for Dinner 300 a short 3 or 4 weeks ago, the day before the Daytona 500. And we received tremendous media coverage for that event. So I would say, yes, we are doing it. Maybe not in the ranching show that many people are watching today, but we are, I think, looking for opportunities for that. And to do that, those type of sponsorships, of course, are not they're not cheap. And sometimes it's it's kind of like the Super Bowl, when it costs millions of dollars to do a 30-second spot, and with a limited budget. And you might not think we have a limited budget, but in the state of Missouri, we're dealing with about the same number of checkoff dollars today that we did in 1988, 89, 90. We're dealing with, we utilize the same number of dollars, and we know inflation has really affected our purchasing power, but I think we do a pretty darn good job with the dollars that we have today, and we spread them. And when we think that we've only got about, I don't know, 18 to 20 cents for every man, woman, and child in the state of Missouri to promote beef, we reach a lot of people in a hurry.
All good points. Mike, do you find that ironic that as much fire as we get for our environmental footprint these days, that the people are watching shows that are very agricultural in nature? I mean, is that almost ironic to you? It seems like it is to me, but I don't. Maybe it's just all the farmers watching. I don't know.
I would guess that their ratings probably don't have much to do with cattle production. There was one episode where he jumps over the fence and this cow's having trouble calving, and he pulls this calf and immediately it jumps up and runs off. It's about a 200-pound calf. And I don't think that it is about beef. But I will say this: I have an opinion, but my opinion doesn't matter because I'm not on the operating committee, and the operating committee is made up of producers that all have a reason for being there by virtue of whatever organization they belong to, or whatever that process goes. And so if somebody wanted to advertise on, just to make sure everybody understands how this works, if somebody wanted to advertise on a show like that, they would literally have to come to the operating committee with a plan and a budget, and the operating committee would decide, A, if it met the requirements of the act and order, and B, if they had the funds to fund it. And so it works that way. They don't just arbitrarily pull something out of a hat and say, "Boy, we're gonna do this because this show's popular." It has to go through all the normal channels and work in it through the process.
Very, very good point there. So I know we're just about an hour now, and I've got just a couple more questions that I think I'd like to get to before we wrap things up this evening. And Mike, I'll kind of throw this one at you first. And this is one of those things that the dairy industry has fought for a lot of years, and kind of peeling back to the synthetic meat issue. Obviously, there's reasons they want to use that sort of nomenclature. How do we protect that? And how do we not end up like the dairy producers of this country that have lost the branding of milk per se, that it's turned into other alternative milks, if as they would like to put it. How do we protect that nomenclature? And is that something the Beef Checkoff needs to be looking at, or can they?
Boy, I don't think so. Again, I haven't been involved directly in those decisions for quite some time, but to me, the only answer that I can see is going through the courts, and I hate that. I mean, that's a pathetic situation. But I will say this, that the dissension or the it seems like the infighting that the industry doesn't help those situations at all. I mean, if we were a lot more unified, it would be a lot easier to get standing in courts and go down that road. But that's, in my opinion, that is strictly a legal issue. And if the word hamburger has ever been copyrighted or any attempt to have been protected, then somebody needs to defend that protection. And that's what I'm wondering. I don't know. I'm not an attorney that's involved in that. But literally milk. Who would have thought you'd have had to protect milk? I mean, I'm old enough that we got our milk in a metal container out on the front porch in glass jars that had the little cardboard top on top of it. So I mean, I would have never thought that you might have an option someday that'd be made out of almonds. But I don't see any way around that other than the industry is going to have to be able to prove that there's economic damage from somebody else using some of those terms or some of those brands.
Mark, you got anything to add to that? I assume that's probably crossed your desk at some point or another, the nomenclature surrounding beef products.
Yes. Yes, Zach, it has crossed mine. And I know, even in Jefferson City this last year, the cattlemen were very active in some wording and how to get some legislation going to try to protect some of that nomenclature as well. So it does go across there. You think back, it didn't seem to be a big deal. Butter was butter, but now, there you can have almond butter, you can have peanut butter, you can have just about any kind of butter you want out of a nut, and then you can make some other kind of butters too, right? But I think if we can continue to talk about that beef is the real thing, it's real food and it's raised by real people. I think that those that, I guess I would say a burger is it beef? Well, a burger can be lots of different things, but when you start calling it hamburger, I think, we all agree that that's beef. And we want to try to do that as much as possible. And to me, a real hamburger is different than, as I said earlier, a soy burger. And, but you can have blends of a lot of different things. And I think we just need to keep concentrating and promoting the 100% beef is the beef of choice. And we need to continue doing that. So protecting that would be something that, of course, is a policy issue, and we'll support our friends on the policy side to do everything they can do to protect those names.
Very good. So, gentlemen, like I said, we've kind of surpassed an hour now, and I've got one more interesting question that I'll kind of throw to each of you. And I'm going to change a little bit and maybe how the question was submitted, but let's just say you can take it whatever direction you want to, whether it's a checkoff or an industry-focused question. If you could change or alter, or you wish maybe one thing was just different within the beef industry, within beef checkoff, within really name it. It's really an open-ended question, but what might be one of those things you wish was different moving forward, if you had your magic wand, if you will. And I say this with a lot of respect to the positions that you guys have held and continue to hold, and it's, you know, it's not a, it is a loaded question a little bit, but it's, you know, this is, I think, the open-ended part where, you know, if you've got an opinion you'd like anybody to hear moving forward, I certainly would respect your opinions on this. So Mike, I'm going to throw this to you. If you had one thing that you could maybe change or wish was different moving forward, what would it be?
I would like for the cow-calf segment to have more leverage, but to do that, they're going to have to be able to communicate the value they add to the industry. And to do that, they're going to have to break out of the ancient paradigm, marketing paradigm that we're in. And I have never been in favor of a mandatory ID program, but there's not a single supply chain I've been aware of that doesn't require some kind of identity preservation. So I think there's an opportunity. There's going to be an opportunity here for cow-calf producers to communicate the value that they add. And I think they're going to have to make some changes to get that done. So that would be a true value-based marketing system would be what I'd be interested in.
Mark, I'm gonna throw that question to you, and I know you sit in a little different chair and have a little different perspective maybe than Mike has got, but we're all in the same industry. So, what's one thing you might like to see different moving forward?
Well, I guess as I look at the industry today and the challenges that we face, sometimes I think, and I think Mike alluded to it earlier, you know, we can only be stronger with voice. And sometimes, you know, people say we shoot to the inside, we shoot towards our industry many times instead of trying to unify and go outside. So we can only be stronger together. And if we can have strength with marketing, strength with policy together, and it would be great if we could figure out ways to bridge some of the, as I would say, the divides between different cattle organizations in the state and in the country, to try to sit down and understand the differences and why the differences are, and open up the minds. I think it would be beneficial. But I think in the business that we're in and the different sizes and scales of the operations, that is not an easy thing to accomplish. And I think many times if we could just figure out a way to sit down and figure it out together and walk out and walk unified, I think that we would become an even stronger organization than what we are. I do think some of the things that we do in the marketing is, you know, and Mike alluded to traceability, is that traceability is going to become an important part of our market. And if we, if producers can be rewarded for those management practices, to where even at the cow-calf level, they can have a calf that's traceable back to their farm, and instead of having 1 or 2 order buyers, they have 6 or 7 or 8 order buyers. That creates a bigger, stronger market than ever before. I think that's going to help. It's going to help the entire industry. And once you start getting paid for your management and opening up new markets for your animals, I think that will finally, everybody will see the reward, and they'll start, you know, as I would say, responding to that when they see what is going to take place. I don't think it's a mandatory program, but I think voluntary, and once people see the rewards, I think it would help build our industry and bring back more profitability.
Well, gentlemen, I think to kind of be a response to both of those, I hope you're both right, because I know a lot of struggling producers out there that are looking for answers, that are looking for things to change, and I certainly hope for the health of this industry and moving forward, that we can grab a bigger share of that retail dollar. As I said earlier, one of my favorite quotes from these sessions: "I see the problem, I don't know the answer." I hope one day we can find that answer. So, Mike and Mark, I certainly want to give thanks to you guys for being a part of this discussion. I think we've covered a lot of different points. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I hope that this discussion has been valuable, and if nothing else, it spurs somebody to get involved in the process, as you alluded to, Mike, going forward, because the more voices we can have at the end of the day, the better the solution can be. So again, guys, I truly appreciate you being a part of this. I think we've kind of reached the ending for tonight in the questions. And so once again, I just want to thank you for being a part of the virtual Missouri Livestock Symposium. And for everybody that is listening tonight and into the future, you can go to MissouriLivestock.com and see all of the other things that we were able to do with our virtual session this year. And as a committee, we are planning on moving forward, and hope maybe we can get you gentlemen to Kirksville, Missouri to be a part of it when we can get back to our traditional in-person event. So again, kudos to you. Great job. Thank you very much. I'll conclude this for the evening, and hope everybody stays safe, stays well, and we have a good calving season moving forward, right? So I just want to say good night to everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.